Greetings to our live stream. The subject today is empowerment, and now what? We were supposed to have an individual who would be joining us, but unfortunately she hasn't shown up so far. Let me go ahead and explain how we'll go ahead and run it today. I'm running some music, and so I have to be a little bit careful due to copyrights. And so then we'll go ahead and continue a dialogue, all of you and I hear an echo. Echo. So I can see this is going to be an interesting show. We're broadcasting on LinkedIn Live and YouTube. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box. And I can tell I'm going to have to be a little bit more inventive here. This is Radio Tipping Point. Don't turn that dial. And our subject is empowerment. Anybody care to give me a definition of empowerment? We're live. Vienna, Austria. You can call us, country code 43, 1 for Vienna, 319-0999-33. Let me repeat, 43 for Austria, 1 for Vienna, 319-0999-33. And we're in the studios in the Kloster Neuburger Straße, 20th District, Vienna. Sumantra says to empowerment, how do we motivate and infuse confidence in ourselves? Is empowerment something that's bestowed upon us, or is it something that we need to go ahead and create ourselves? Very often we hear somebody telling us that we are empowered. But the fact is, there's only one person who can power us, and that's ourselves. You're listening to Radio Tipping Point. My name is Mike Boyle, and we are doing a live stream. We're on LinkedIn Live and YouTube, and we have a call. Good morning. Correct. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, well then, thank you very much for that feedback, and see if we can get some others. We are currently live streaming on LinkedIn Live and also on YouTube, so we're hoping to come up with some feedback from the chat box. Thanks again for calling. Yes, empowerment. That's something that we hear very often is bestowed upon us. Let's try this in proper English, Mike. But actually, that's something that we instill in ourselves. And let me give you some examples. Before the show, I started looking around and seeing, so what kind of definitions do we actually have for this term empowerment? And I found two basic ones, and they're quite demonstrative, actually. One refers to the workplace, in the workplace. And there they say that you have the right to go ahead and make decisions. So that means there's something tied to the structure of the organization, or perhaps maybe your superior who goes ahead and bestows this upon you. And in fact, that was the inspiration for this program, because very often we ask the question, so that's great, we're empowered. So now what do we do? I have some feedback from Gisela. She says, empowering ourselves in a way requires self-confidence, doesn't it? Yes, right. In fact, if you do not feel comfortable about yourself, then the difficulty is of course, dealing with others. You seem to be very often in a challenge. You feel threatened by others. But if you feel self-confident, then basically what the others do doesn't really make too much of a difference. So how does that work with? And I'd like to go ahead and take a look at this question from two different perspectives. One being from the workplace, and also as an individual. Let's see how they get some more feedback. Let's take a look. Nope. Okay, good. We're looking good. You see quite often within companies, because they're trying to react to a situation. We know this quite well based upon all of that of what we've gone through in the last 4 months, that companies need to be agile. They need to be adaptive. And so they have not been in a situation to completely control their employees, because their employees are not there. Their employees are at home. And yeah, that's been a bit of a struggle. And because it's not clear what individuals need to do, and this is one I've observed quite often, and perhaps you've picked up on this one as well. Because the employees are at home, that means the superiors haven't had a chance to directly see what's going on, or they feel if indeed somebody's not in the office, they're not doing anything. So all of a sudden we have this plethora of Zoom calls that are taking place. And I've heard from a number of friends, they said that they have not had as much contact with their superiors ever in their entire career as they've had over the last 4 months. And so on the one hand, your boss is going ahead and saying, yeah, you're empowered. But then they're checking up on you all the time. So is that truly empowerment? And I think that's clearly one of the problems that we have. And then there's the other side, looking at it from a completely personal level. What do we need as individuals to feel empowered? And in essence, it's a path. It's not something that happens from one day to the next. It requires a number of techniques. The first step is being aware of what you're doing. And of course, that requires you to be able to look at yourself from a different perspective, as if you're looking at yourself from a distance, from here to here. Can you actually go ahead and observe your actions as if you were another person? Now, that might sound funny to some of you, but that if we're going to correct something, then that would be one of the first steps. Smata came up with an interesting statement. Yes, there is a thin difference between empowered and feeling ignored. What does that really mean, feeling ignored? Does that mean that it doesn't matter what we're doing? And we might get to the point of where we think it doesn't matter whether we do anything or not. I can tell you a story, something that happened to me. This was roughly about 10 years ago. I was working on a job where I didn't get much instruction. Basically, I was given this title and I had to go ahead and figure out exactly what they were looking for. Part of it was trying something out and seeing whether there was a positive resonance or not. In other words, did they like what I did? If not, then I need to go ahead and try a different strategy. But slowly, I was able to go ahead and figure out roughly what this job entailed and how I needed to go ahead and approach it. And so I kept on going, trying to come up with something tied to this image that I had in my head of what this position was all about. Did some research on the net, tried to figure out how others were managing a similar position, and then I went at it. Most people did not understand what I was doing. It took a lot of communication to explain to individuals what the actual added value was. But I felt I was doing a very good job. I was able to go ahead and be creative, come up with something that brought added value. And then getting back to this point, I felt that it didn't make any difference one way or the other what I was doing. And then I felt that I was being ignored. Even worse than that is, if you were just being ignored, that means that they were recognizing your presence in some fashion. Whether I did anything or not made no difference. So what happens in that situation? You do nothing. That's what happens. You end up doing nothing. So in a situation like that, of course, you're not feeling very empowered, are you? So how do you go ahead and turn it around? I can tell you what I ended up doing in that situation. Probably for the first time, I asked myself the question, what did I want to do? And once I was able to go ahead and figure out what that is, and that's not so easy either, because you think you have an idea of what you want to do, and then you continue on this journey. You're making adjustments the whole time. And sometimes you come to the realization that's not really quite that of what I was looking for, but the journey helps you in figuring out what it's all about. And then you start going through some revelations. And then you start realizing that a lot of the things that you thought were important really weren't important anymore, because you'd freed yourself of that. That, for me, has a lot to do with empowerment. So what gets in the way of us actually feeling empowered? I'd like to start with a subject. It's called social conditioning, which means that we have programs in our head, how we expect things to be. And in fact, it's been proven scientifically that you have processes that are hard-coded in your head that automatically affect the way that you look at things. Now, this can be from the outside, but more importantly, it could be from the inside, how you look at yourself and how you think people perceive you to be. And then, of course, we have the question of conditioning. Or there was a phrase that I heard not too long ago. It was called psychological immunization. Let me explain to you what this term is. Psychological immunization. Think about what it was like mid-March when we went into the lockdown. What did we consider to be normal at that time? Now we're at the end of July. And then I pose the question to you, what do we consider to be normal? And you see that there is a great difference between that of what we looked at as being normal back in mid-March and how we see it today. And then you have to raise the question, so what happened in between? Well, of course, tied to this idea of psychological immunization, just out of necessity, we are required to consider this to be the new normal. Because if we're not able to do that, we have problems struggling to survive. And of course, this has a very strong effect on the way that we look at not only bad things or things that are perhaps not necessarily going in the right direction, but we do it for good things as well. We love saying that things are so much worse than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, and we seem to glorify the way things were before. But the fact is, we're talking about the way it never was. We have this tendency in our heads to look, of course, we're looking at the situation through our eyes today. And that means that we're dealing with a certain bias. And of course, we were in a completely different condition back then, where perhaps we weren't so bothered by certain things as we are today. Does that have anything to do with the condition? Or does it have everything to do with our condition, the way that we're actually looking at things? So the social conditioning, or so social, the social condition, cognition, sorry, social cognition, plays a very important role. And I'd like to go ahead and focus on a few of the things that I believe are related to that. And the first one is fear of failure. Have you ever noticed for children, they don't have much fear of failure. They're willing to go ahead and try a number of different things. Sometimes it will work out, and sometimes it won't. Does it really faze the kids? Not really. They just pick themselves up and they try something new, or they try it again. That's what learning is actually about, isn't it? So how come this problem of fear of failure is so big for us? I think this is another form of social cognition. Let me explain to you why. We think that we can do anything we want. And then we start with school. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine this morning, or maybe yesterday, I forget. And we were trying to define exactly at what point in time does this conditioning kick in. And I said, first grade. And he came back and said, actually, when the kids go down the street, I personally think that's a little bit of taking it to an extreme. I don't say he's wrong. But he also mentioned kindergarten, and that's part of it as well. Is conditioning bad? For the most part, it's not. As long as the message is positive, then it's fine. But that's the problem. The message is not fine when we are told, no, you did that wrong. And that becomes a stigma. It's how you go ahead and not only are perceived by the others, but it's how you start to perceive yourself. So we continue, right? We continue in this path. And under the adage, if you get hit over the head so often, you start to realize that it hurts. And that's the same of the conditioning. And then you get to the point where the last thing you ever want to do is put yourself in a situation that you might make a mistake. And then I raise the question, so how are we supposed to learn? And how are we supposed to really function? And how are we ever supposed to obtain empowerment under these situations? Let's look at the corporate environment. So nobody wants to make a mistake. So that means that nobody wants to make a decision. Why? Because if you make a decision, then you will be considered at fault if it doesn't work out. But the fact is, there's a number of things that we do that we have no clue whether they're going to work or not. So by nature, it could go belly up. And so this is all part of the conditioning, right? This is the conditioning we go through. There's some other elements I'd like to go ahead and talk about. But before I do that, just to remind everybody who might have just gone ahead and turned in right now, either to the live stream or to the radio show, and we're being compelled to be a bit adaptive today because we were supposed to have a guest. Unfortunately, she has some technical difficulties coming out of the United States. Apparently they had some power outages in New York. And so there are some difficulties getting onto the internet. So I apologize for anybody who was hoping to have an interview today. This is turning into more of a monologue, although I welcome you, and this is going to be my call to action to you, to go ahead and give me some questions via the chat box. Or you can actually go ahead and call us at the station. Our telephone number is country code 43, 1 for Vienna, 319-0999-33. Let me repeat. 1 for Vienna, 319-0999-33. And you are listening to Radio Tipping Point. My name is Mike Boyle. And thanks for listening. And thanks for watching. So is fear of failure the only problem that we're talking about? No, there's some other elements I'd like to go ahead and cover. Have you ever noticed if you were to put a horse, if you were to hook up a horse via a rope or something to a chair, the horse remains stable. In other words, the horse does not move. And there's a certain conditioning that's taking place within the horse because the horse believes, oh, I'm hooked up to some other object, and so therefore I am supposed to stay stable. Now this chair could be a very small chair. Would be very easy for the horse to go ahead and just take the chair with it. But there's a certain conditioning that goes on. And there's another term I'd like to go ahead and talk to you about today, and it's called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness, of course, just by nature, looking at the word, learn, that means that is knowledge that was acquired. Helplessness is a condition that we did not have before. So in other words, we went from not being helpless to being helpless. So that's kind of a process, or you can certainly call it a process. So what does that one actually look like? Let me give you a couple of examples. If you are told that you cannot do something and you are continuously giving negative reinforcement about whatever this might be, either ability to go ahead and perform certain actions, or maybe something that you tried out and it didn't quite work out and you were ostracized, made fun of. After a while, you think that you cannot do it. Gisela has come out and asked us a question. What do you think, when do we get aware of our social cognition? That's a good question. How to adapt if not valid anymore because we have been empowered? Oh, that's a really good one. And I'd be keen on some more feedback either from the chat box, or perhaps if somebody would like to go ahead and call us and give us some feedback about that. We do things every day, and for the most part, we don't think about them, because if we had to think about everything we did every single day, our minds would explode. So that means we've set up routines. And because of these routines, there are things that we do and they just happen. And in fact, very often, I remember, especially being involved in the corporate world, there were a number of times I was doing things I was not cognitive of those things that I was doing. And I'm not always talking about good things I was doing. In fact, there are a lot of things I did not like about myself back then. Way too aggressive and not always nice. And so let's look at how those things are put together, directly looking at the social cognition. There's a theory that basically says that we have three components that drive our behavior. We have trigger, we have process, and we have reward. So we're in a certain situation, and directly related to social cognition, we are not aware that this is taking place, but all of a sudden, that because it's that trigger is taking place, we go through a certain process, a certain routine, and we expect some sort of reward at the end. Let me give you an example, and some of you might know this one. Oh, it's 5 o'clock, I can have something to drink. What does that actually mean? That means you're waiting for 5 o'clock to come so you can finally drink. Now, whether that reward might be the actual consumption of the drink per se, and we know very often how that movie is going to end for certain individuals. And so we wait for that trigger, that being 5 o'clock. We go ahead and get the bottle out and we pour ourselves a drink. And then you go ahead, and because this is all part of being social, you say, hey, it's 5 o'clock, we can have something to drink. It's like one of the most absurd things in the world. So let's say you decided that was not a good reward. It's not the reward that you want, because it puts you in a situation that you really don't like yourself. You don't like that this is a routine that really doesn't bring any value. You don't feel very empowered. So then how do you go ahead and change that? Are we going to get rid of that trigger? 5 o'clock? No, it comes every day. 5 o'clock is going to come every day. Can we change the reward? Yeah, we can change the reward. So what can that reward actually look like? So you change it to something that helps you feel good about yourself, truly feel good about yourself. In the ability that you truly feel empowered, that you were able to master it. So you've set this new reward. So what needs to change? Well, the process needs to change. The process that you've actually gone ahead and used all this time of getting out the bottle and having something to drink, well, you have to have a new process because you have a new reward. So the idea is that the trigger is still going to be there. You have something ingrained in your mind, 5 o'clock, and very possibly something like this could eventually go away. You're no longer cognizant at the time, and with that, you've solved the problem of the 5 o'clock. But getting back to your question, Gisela, the question really is, how do we go ahead and establish rewards that allow us to go ahead and accomplish something that's important for us? Because as was mentioned earlier, empowerment is all about doing something for yourself. It's about self-pride. It's about self-determination. And we have all these issues that we need to deal with. Christoph Cousin asked, instead of going for a drink with friends at 5, you can head to the gym. Right, that's an excellent example, Christoph, because what you've done here in this example you just gave was you replaced the drink with the gym. And so the actual reward is the physical stimulation. Excellent example, thank you. Let's go back to learned helplessness. You know, when you're a kid, you really do think you can do everything. At least I did. I was very fortunate coming from an environment where we're told at a very early age that you can do whatever you want. And then you find out later on that you can't necessarily do all that you want, but you make a healthy compromise sometime along the ways. But the worst part is when you think that you cannot do that and you don't even try anymore. You think this is my lot in life. I cannot move any farther with this. And so we just go ahead and accept it. I'd like to go back to the call that we received in the beginning of the program. And I'd like to remind you that I am taking telephone calls. Country code 43 for Austria, 1 for Vienna, 319-099933. So let me go ahead and try to close the loop with the call that we got in the beginning. And so it was that was not learned helplessness that she referred to. She was referring to a change in her situation, and she needed to come up with a way of dealing with it in a better fashion. They're not always self-inflicted. Sometimes we run across situations where we can't really do too much about it. And then the real question is, how resilient are we? How capable are we about actually bouncing back from that of what we are confronted with, and we try to turn it around? So we have a number of people running around thinking they can't do something. And they don't try because they've firmly implanted in their brains that they cannot do it. And this continues through time. Let's go on that journey together. Individual who's already gone past school, gone past high school, and up to that point in time, it was a question of not necessarily what you can do, because that one was thrown overboard a long time ago, but what you have to do. And then you go on to university, right? You finish up your studies, and then you raise the question, well, what am I going to do? Because you're confronted with this question all the time. And I always thought it would be great for kids if I can get kids to go ahead and come up with this response. The next time you ask a 5-year-old, so what are you going to do when you grow up? I'd love them to come out and say, I'm going to Disneyland. Yeah, but the real question is, so what do we actually go ahead and do at that point? We've graduated, really not sure what we're going to do. And so you end up taking the next example the next offer that's out there. And I've heard this from a number of my students that, well, I'm not really too crazy about this job, but we're in Corona and who knows if I'm going to get another offer. Nicholas has a statement here. Nicholas says, has a lot to do with communications and clarity of rules and roles. What do you think you can do yourself to define your own role more clearly? For example, others don't do that for you. Yes, of course, you need to go ahead and define this. And you have to go ahead and decide that the rules that are being bestowed upon you, first of all, are they truly rules? Or are these rules that you've come up with? And I really, yes, I'd like to go ahead and piggyback on this idea. I've come to the conclusion that very often we make up rules. And you have to raise the question, so why do we go ahead and make up rules? Because it's easier, and I think this has everything to do with learned helplessness. We make up rules because then we can always go ahead and say, well, we couldn't do it anyways. So basically, we do not take this on as something that we can control ourselves, but rather we say, well, this has been bestowed upon us, and we can't do anything about it. In fact, I'd like to go ahead and see technically how I can go ahead and manage this one. For those of you on radio, I'm going to have to be extra descriptive because you are not going to be able to see what I'm showing here on the screen. This, my friends, is the drama triangle. Now, within the drama triangle, you can imagine it's a triangle, so it takes the form of a triangle. And there are 3 roles that we have within the drama triangle. Let me go ahead and explain to you the roles. And this has everything to do with rules that are not there. We have the victim, who we would say is the main actor. Everything evolves around the victim. And then we have 2 other roles. One is the rescuer, and the other one is the perpetrator. So the rescuer, as you can very well imagine, is supposed to rescue the victim from the perpetrator. And of course, we always need a bad person because otherwise we don't have a good narrative. Somebody that we need to go ahead and blame for everything. And that is basically the perpetrator. But let me tell you how I've seen this game played a number of times, and I'd be curious to get your feedback. Why are people rescuers, for starters? Why do you think people are rescuers? Basically, they have a need to go ahead and save people. Oh, and I have a call. Good morning. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And maybe if I can go ahead and continue, you can stay on the line, finishing describing the drama triangle, because I would say, no, please, you can stay on the line, because I'd be keen on your feedback after this. Let me explain these 3 roles and how within these 3 roles, none of them come into the description you just came up with. So you have the victim, and then you have the rescuer who feels that he or she needs to go ahead and save the day for the victim. That would be the so-called hero who comes in. And the real problem is the rescuer has a clear need. The rescuer needs victims because otherwise the rescuer can't be a rescuer. And then, of course, we have the perpetrator, somebody who is to be blamed for what's going on. Now, the fact is, whether the perpetrator did anything wrong or not is truly immaterial because we need somebody to play this role. And we see this quite often. I can come up with a number of examples here in our society today. The best one I can think of are migrants here not in all of Europe and also in the United States and probably a number of other places in the world. The migrants are the perpetrators because they are the ones that are going ahead and destroy our peaceful life. Although in essence, we have other problems that were perhaps being deflected by the arrival of the migrants. But the fact is, we were not working on a very healthy situation, anyways. And for some politicians, this is a great example where you go ahead and bring in a perpetrator so that deflects from all those things that you're doing that would be visible otherwise. And I'm not referring necessarily to the US election, but you can interpret that any way you like. Now, the real problem within this drama triangle is that, so the rescuer is to save the victim from the perpetrator. Now, the victim only cares about being a victim. So there's going to be a time where something that the rescuer tried to do for the victim didn't work out. And so what happens here? The rescuer becomes a perpetrator, and the victim says, but you told me to do this, and it didn't work out. And so all of a sudden, the rescuer is completely perplexed because the rescuer is used to being a rescuer and not interested in being in the role of the perpetrator. And all of a sudden, the rescuer is completely on the defensive and said, how come I'm trying to do something good for you? And we see this over and over again. And this has everything to do with learned helplessness. And what the message that I'd like to go ahead and bring across to all of you is that, can we go ahead, and this has everything to do with empowerment, can we go ahead and recognize when we are currently in a situation tied to something like the drama triangle, can we go ahead and look at that from a distance with the intention of saying, that's not a game I want to play anymore, and actually cognitively do something about it. And that's why I wanted to keep you on the phone, apart from the fact that I appreciate you calling. The individual who comes and actually wants to support you does not play this game because they don't feel that they need to play games. All they're if you don't want to take the feedback, then you don't take the feedback. It's not a condition. Somebody doesn't give you positive feedback with the expectation to say, oh, you saved my life, because then we're back to the drama triangle. I give you some feedback and either you take it or you don't, but that's your choice. Because if we believe in empowerment, not only do we believe in our own empowerment, but we believe in the empowerment for the others as well. And that's extremely important, right? Yeah, and I'd like to go ahead and piggyback again on what you said and show how that this directly relates to the drama triangle. Because if we think that there's somebody else who's controlling, which role are we playing? We're playing the victim, aren't we? So what do we do? If we are empowered, don't we have a choice to be the victim or not to be the victim? You do this yourself. You decide that you don't want to play this game anymore. Now it doesn't mean it, and this is kind of getting back to what Gisela was asking earlier. I'm not saying this is easy. This can be an extremely difficult role that you're taking on in freeing yourself of victimhood. But the fact is, we have a choice. We have a choice. We might not always like the choice that we have, but nevertheless, we have one. And so either we go ahead and acknowledge that we have a choice, or we go ahead and accept the situation that it is as it is, and basically the longer we are on this planet, the more conditioned all these elements are. So the real goal here is to free ourselves of this victimhood, and the only way we can start doing that is saying that we don't want to play this game anymore. And all of a sudden, could you imagine, just piggybacking again on what you said, what would happen if everybody went ahead and decided that they didn't want to play the game? That would mean that we would take the power away from all of those individuals that you were referring to. That means we, as human beings, have the power ourselves to do something about it. The real issue is that how do we overcome it? And that kind of gets back to what Gisela was asking. How do we actually go ahead and make that happen? And it's not an easy affair. And it doesn't mean that it works like a charm, that we need to go through ups and downs, and we might have relapses. But regardless, I personally believe that if we're trying to live a fulfilling life, and where we are trying to take control of what that is ours, then we have no choice. I'd like to get to some of the other chats, and I appreciate again you calling. All right, thanks again. All right, cheers. Okay, and I see that there were some other messages come through. We have another 3 minutes as such. So this, in spite of everything, it went very, very quick. And I was able to figure out some way to keep on moving. And I was able to talk about something that I think is very, very important. This is the drama triangle, but I'd like to go ahead and get to some of the other questions. And I apologize if I was not able to address all of them. Okay, I'll go ahead and address that later on. No worries. So let me go ahead and close with one other element. That's important for looking at the subject of empowerment, and that would be tied to this concept of psychological safety. And I'd like to close the program with this subject of psychological safety. You know, when we're in groups, and I think this this has something to do with the call that we received right now, that if you are in groups where you feel that you're going to be completely attacked all the time, then that's not a very safe environment. And so the question is, how do we, either as individuals or as a collective, create an environment where psychological safety flourishes? And that has to be our goal, if indeed we feel that empowerment as such is a goal that's worth striving for. And I would not be the one, I would never go ahead and try to impose something on any individuals. We all have the freedom of choice. That being said, is my closing words, yes, because I have 1 more minute to go, is closing words. What's this program all about? What am I trying to do with Radio Tipping Point? And it's all tied to 3 elements. And one is the empowerment that we talked about today. And of course, it's the subject that we can continue talking about for a very, very long time. But once you feel empowered, then you feel no threat from anybody else. And you get to a point where you realize that the individuals that you're talking to that are perhaps a little bit different than you are able to do things that you can't do. And you do not feel threatened by that. You actually see that as being a plus. And you wonder what they can actually do. And then once we've gotten to the point of where we can accomplish inclusiveness, That's when social transformation takes place. And I am at the last 20 seconds of the show. Again, I'd like to thank you all for sticking around. I hope you found some added value in this show today. It was very adaptive because I had somebody who was supposed to be interviewed fill out. And I hope that you're able to go ahead and join us next week. You've been listening to Radio. And I'd like to thank all of you for staying with us today, and hope that you were able to get some added value out of this. And look forward. I will be on next Saturday with another live stream, and then we'll be back with Radio Tipping Point next week. So thank you very much for joining.